The experts all have their opinions, and real people are reacting to the decision as well, with emotion and some measure of confusion.
I agree with the decision. I mean, I think it's a good thing for everybody to be covered with health insurance.
I don't know who knows what the heck's going on. Like everybody's saying, nobody's read the bill. Actually, I'm kind of greedy. I'm worried how it's going to impact me.
Yeah, and that's what everyone is really wondering. And Prole, I guess if we could pick up back, so they made that decision, so it leaves us with what?
Yeah, so the Medicaid portion they determined was unconstitutional if it takes, because it's conditioned on taking away prior benefits that the states had. So what they said was that's not going to be enforceable. A state can either accept or reject this increased funding for increased eligibility, but you still maintain, whether you reject it, you still maintain the prior eligibility. What Robert says, we don't even know what the states are going to do, whether or not all or some are going to reject this. He anticipates everyone would accept it. So he doesn't need to sever this and declare the whole act unconstitutional. The dissenters, Alito, Scalia, Thomas, and Kennedy, said, look, if that portion is unconstitutional, that's a significant part of the bill. You should have declared the whole act unconstitutional.
Interesting, interesting. So let's turn to Deb and Ellen and talk about how you think we go from here.
Well, the Medicaid piece is a very significant piece for the patients that are served by the federally qualified health centers. And just as a background information, there's 14 federally qualified health centers in the state, and they serve about 300,000 patients statewide, generally in low-income areas. 57% of the federally qualified health center patients are on Medicaid, and another quarter of them are uninsured. Now, the uninsured folks are generally childless adults, and that's the population that would be most affected by the Medicaid expansion. So for the health center patients, there's a hope that Connecticut will continue to move forward with Medicaid expansion, even though there's no threat for loss of federal funding.
So you are breathing, I know I had spoken with you yesterday, I mean, you're breathing a sigh of relief today.
Yeah, a little bit. We feel this is a great victory for patients across the state, obviously. But still, just kind of keeping an eye on what our state is going to choose to do. Connecticut was the first state to take advantage of the opportunities to expand Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act. And we did so by expanding Medicaid to childless adults up to 56% of federal poverty level, which doesn't sound like a lot of money. It's only $5,600 a year or so. And the Affordable Care Act would provide the opportunity to expand even further to 133% of the federal poverty level. So we're hopeful, but still a little bit cautious, hoping that Connecticut will continue on this path.
And Ellen, do you think, I mean, it propels Connecticut to get on the path towards?
Absolutely. This is a really good deal for states. For the first year, and when people come into insurance, especially when they haven't had it for a while, they've put off a lot of health care. And so that very first year, they're more expensive. In Oregon, they were 25% more expensive than they were before, and then they will be down the road. They get, you know, checks and screens, and they find problems, and they need to be treated. So in that first year or two, the federal government pays 100% of the costs. That is just a remarkable bargain. And even in the out years, they're still paying 90% of the cost for new folks coming in. So I'm sort of struck by why a state wouldn't do this, because people don't stop getting sick when they're uninsured. They end up coming into hospitals, they end up coming into other programs. So the state and taxpayers generally, and also in all of our premiums, we're paying for this. This is not new expenses. We're just doing it in a smarter way, and the feds have really stepped up and funded it for states. So I think it's a phenomenal deal.
Yeah, I mean, I think the concern from the state standpoint was twofold. One, if you allow this kind of coercive nature as far as federal spending, there's no limit on what the federal government can make the states do, and that's really why it would be a violation of the 10th Amendment, which really, the Constitution was set forth to protect state rights, and the federal government is supposed to be a limited government. As far as the deal, I mean, what the Chief Justice's opinion noted, didn't think a lot of states would turn it down, but there's also a concern of not knowing what that, right now it's 90% for the second, third years, but what that number might ultimately be, and once you've commit to it, are you looking at 10 years out, paying 100% yourself, and so that risk is a concern from the state standpoint.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've heard from health insurers is that this bill has gone a long way in helping the provisions that get people to have insurance. For example, pre-existing conditions. If you have a chronic condition that prohibits you from getting a health plan on the individual market, starting in 2014, if you're an adult, you'll be able to get health insurance. It's called guaranteed issue. And the question, though, is what does the bill do to control costs? And there's a lot of talk about that. There are some provisions to better coordinate care, and some insurers are doing that on their own to better coordinate care. And yet, health insurer executives like Cigna's David Cordani and Aetna's Mark Bertolini are saying there are mandates that are going to drive up premiums, and there are taxes on businesses, and that's going to be felt in the premiums.
And so, how would you describe their mood when you spoke to them?
They seemed very matter of fact. They wanted to give the impression that this is, they were ready with a strategy that they were already on for 2 years, and had the mandate been struck down, they would have adjusted and without much incident. It's a monumental task. There have been people working around the clock at all these health insurance companies tailoring plans. One of the things is all of these states had to draft up an exchange, an online market on which you can buy a health plan. And so this is a very good thing because you can shop and compare apples to apples. It's difficult because a lot of states put off any work on this until the Supreme Court would make a decision. So now they're scrambling to catch up. They may not be able to do it in time. They may have to ask for extensions. We'll see what happens in places like Alabama and Mississippi, and these places that refuted this. In Connecticut, we're in excellent shape, not to mention the fact that there were some provisions that were already guarded for in state law, such as allowing 20-something up to 26 years old to stay on their parents' plan, let's say if they're in college or if they're, immediately out of college.
Right, right. We only have about a minute before the next break, but I wanted to ask, Matt mentioned that Connecticut's kind of in excellent shape, but what do you think the immediate effect will be, or what are you hoping that the immediate effect will be for healthcare here?
Well, one thing is that in terms of cost that's already happening, people will start getting a rebate check. There are requirements in the law that they have to spend either 80 or 85% of premiums on actual medical care. That limits how much they can take in administration and profit. And if they go over, people are going to start getting those checks in August. So that's one way I think that's made a big difference. And we've seen lower increases this last year just because of that provision that's already come in. So I think there's a lot of stuff that's sort of stealth in the law that will control costs.
Yeah, and I believe that the Supreme Court ruling today really reaffirms a movement that's been going on in the commercial market and in the public programs as well, and what the federal government's intent was, and that is really to change the conversation about health care and get people to start thinking about wellness and taking care of themselves and not just treating something when it becomes urgent. And I think that is something that could immediately get into people's minds, that they should really start to take care of themselves.
All right. We're going to take a quick break and continue our conversation. Still more to talk about. We'll continue coming back.